Hi students, I'm Una.
And I'm Scott.
I'm a UK OET teacher.
I'm also an OET teacher from the UK.
We've been teaching students to pass their exams for many years.
And now we're excited to help you pass your exams too.
This is the Swoosh English OET podcast.
Let's get started.
Are you struggling with your OET exam preparation?
Are you unsure how to reach your target score of a grade A or B? Let Swoosh English help you get there.
Go to www.swooshenglish.com or click the link in the description for your free OET complete guide to writing.
Everything you need to know to pass your OET writing step by step. Go to www.swooshenglish.com or click on the link in the description below.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Swoosh English podcast. My name is Una.
And my name is Scott.
And today we are looking at the OET exam. In particular, we're going to look at the OET writing criteria, those 6 different things that you need to satisfy in the criteria in order to achieve an A or a B. So we're going to really break them down, and understanding the criteria is so important and making sure that you get those high scores.
It's really important because this exam is very different to any other exam that you may have done if you've done an English exam before, and also the fact that there's so much going on professionally with this examination that you really do need to have a good understanding about what goes into writing a good referral letter, for example.
Yeah, and
in
understanding
OET.
the criteria.
So the criteria is essential because maybe you've done IELTS before and you decide, like many students, okay, I want to try OET now, but you go into this with a academic essay style mindset and you're using a lot of the terms and writing styles and genre styles that just wouldn't be applicable or even suitable for this style of task.
Like all those connectors that are encouraged in IELTS style essays, but maybe not so encouraged within the OET letter.
So anyway, we'll go into more detail about those connectors very soon, but let's just start by breaking down the 6 criteria for OET writing.
Of course, so that's the most important thing. First, tell you what the criteria actually are.
So the first criteria and the most important criteria is actually purpose. So purpose is different to the rest of the criteria, by the way. It's only scored up to 3. So you have 3 points for purpose, but then you have 7 points for the other criteria, which I'll just go through now. They are content, conciseness and clarity, genre and style, organization and layout, and language.
Very good. So all of these, very important. But like you said, 3 for purpose and 7 for all the rest.
So let's start by actually breaking down exactly what purpose is. Even though it's only worth 3 marks, it's still essential to consider what purpose is for the letter, because ultimately your letter does need to have a purpose. You need to be writing for a genuine reason. That is obviously referring someone to another professional in order to continue their medical care. And that's pretty much what purpose is.
Or a discharge letter or whatever it may be. So yeah, it needs to be clear, immediately clear and apparent in the letter what the purpose is. It needs to be clear for the reader at the end of the day. They want to be able to pick up this letter and read the first paragraph, and the purpose is immediately clear and apparent. They know why they are reading this letter, why the person is sent to them, and what they're going to have to do.
So as a candidate, you're essentially saying, why am I writing this letter? What does the reader, aka the doctor, the nurse, the physiotherapist, the dentist, want from me writing this letter?
Exactly, yeah. So let's just say those words again, because they're so important. Immediately clear and apparent at the beginning. So in your first paragraph, you're going to make it clear why the letter is being written, and of course what action needs to be taken by the reader.
And that is essential what you wrote as well, what you just said there as well. It needs to be immediately clear, aka in the first paragraph. So how can we make our writing immediately clear and make our purpose or show our intended purpose from the beginning?
So I'll read out an example here. I'll read out an example sentence that's a really good introduction to your letter with the purpose included. So I am writing to refer the above patient who is suffering from worsening osteoarthritis. Your assessment and management are urgently required.
All right, that's a pretty good introductory paragraph.
Yes.
It says, obviously, the purpose. I'm writing to you. I'm writing to refer the above mentioned patient, so it's a referral letter that's been expressed immediately as well. We have a patient who is suffering from worsening osteoarthritis. Now we know the condition and why it's being written, and also then what we want the person to be done with it, and that is assessment and management, which is urgently required.
That's very important as well. So if that letter is urgent and that has been stated in the case notes, then you do need to state that at the beginning in that first little paragraph.
Fantastic. So another way of writing that as well, you don't need to simply state I am writing to, you could say, thanks for seeing or thanks for taking on the case of blah, 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 etc. as well, just to obviously give you some a bit of variety on how this OET letter is written. But that's the most important thing. The first paragraph needs to immediately address the purpose. But also, the purpose shouldn't just be in the first paragraph. It should be constantly referred to throughout the letter itself and then referred to maybe at the very end as well.
Expanded upon. Yeah, expanded on in the letter. Of course, there's going to be more details about it throughout the letter. But yeah, expanded on at the letter, maybe in the last paragraph. But of course, don't just repeat the exact same sentence that you have written in the first paragraph. You want to use synonyms, okay? Use synonyms and write that sentence in a different way. That's very important.
It is important also that, and we'll get into more detail about this very soon, but it is important that you don't just write the case notes in the same way, in the same format as they appear in the letter. You need to obviously reevaluate them, reformulate them, and put them in appropriately into the letter itself.
Okay.
So that's purpose. So 0 to 3 for purpose. Start off with a good introductory paragraph and get that letter well underway.
Make sure it is absolutely obvious to the reader what you're writing about, why you're writing to them, and you don't want the reader to waste time basically reading through the whole letter, thinking to themselves, why am I reading this? Like, why is this being written to me? So make sure that's what happens. Of course, this situation, this letter, it's supposed to mimic the real life professional situation. So at the end of the day, if you're a doctor or a nurse or medical professional, and you're getting this letter that's just, the purpose is not clear, you're having to read it really, and figure out what's the purpose is, that's not good. That's a time wasting exercise. You guys don't have time to waste. So let's get into content then. Okay, so in content, we're asking ourselves, have you included all the info in an accurate manner? Okay,
all the necessary
have you included
info.
all the necessary information exactly in an accurate manner? So yeah, this is out of 7. Okay, this one is out of 7, and you're required to write for this letter, of course, between 180 and 200 words.
Now, it is important though at the same time that you are not penalized for going under 180 words or over 200 words. You won't lose any marks directly from it.
Yeah.
But if your letter is too short, then you have likely left out some of the important content, and that would affect your score. Or if you write over 200 words, then maybe your letter isn't concise enough, and that will take away.
You've included unnecessary
irrelevant information, which we'll get into in the next section, which is conciseness and clarity. But the important thing is that you've gotten the most important parts of that case note that are essential to the referral and care of this patient, and you have included them.
Yeah, definitely. The key details from the case notes, okay? So make sure that you are giving yourself lots of practice in actually analyzing case notes and making sure you're choosing the correct information to include in your letter. Include everything that's necessary, but also make sure that it's accurately represented.
Yes, true.
So of course you will be marked down in your content if you have simply misrepresented the information. You've written something that's incorrect, you've transferred it over incorrectly, and therefore the person reading your letter
misinterpreted a fact, you misinterpreted some medication as well. It needs to be accurately represented. So when you're spending the time at the beginning of your writing, make sure that you are looking through the case notes. You're obviously checking out the information. What's the letter? Who's the letter to? What's the person's being condition? What information is directly relevant for the care of this patient? And that the referral expert needs to know. Tick them off. So example, you got 6 points. Okay, I got 6 points that are relevant. Make sure that you also include those 6 points then when you're actually writing as well, to ensure you get the most points for the content score.
Definitely. Very important. Okay, so that's content. Have you included everything that's necessary? And have you also accurately represented that information? So let's move on then to the next one. Conciseness. I said that very strangely.
Conciseness
and clarity.
Oh, there we go. You almost said English there. Conciseness and clarity. Great.
Okay, so obviously this is very important in relation to that word count. We always say to our students, we always say to our students, if you're going over 220 words, your conciseness is not, fully up to scratch.
You're going to be including irrelevant information, or maybe you're actually expressing a relevant point in far too many words as well. You're making it too wordy. What could it be? Maybe a 10-word sentence end up being a 30 word sentence
Yes.
with 5 connectors and 4 commas, for example.
Exactly.
So that's what's important, to keep that word count as close to 180 and 200 words as possible. If you go over, you won't directly obviously lose points, but it likely will affect your conciseness and clarity.
Yeah, so conciseness means something that is stated clearly and efficiently, you know, and effectively as well. So at the end of the day, if there's some piece of information that's in this really long, convoluted, so many word sentence, that information could get lost in that sentence, you know? Like, I could actually struggle to understand exactly the important information if there's just so many words in the sentence and it's unclear. So that's very important. Make sure that you don't have these very long sentences and your language is not concise. So yeah, what about clarity then?
So clarity refers to basically
Clear and obvious.
yes, something that is clear and obvious when it's being expressed. So we want to make sure that it is obviously clear, it's not being convoluted, it's not being worded differently, or it's basically a strain for the reader to understand.
Yes.
So in addition to conciseness and clarity, as well as writing too many words, it also takes into account any irrelevant information that you have included. So you might have obviously taken some information from the case notes, which is not directly relevant to the information that the referral expert needs to know, and instead you've written far too much information, then shooting your word count over. And a few examples of things that I've come across when marking my own OET letters are, for example, including irrelevant information about marital status or jobs. Is it really relevant that the person knows that the person is married or not, or if the person is what occupation they have? Are they a doctor? Are they a factory worker? Are they a dentist, for example? Is it really relevant? Unless, obviously, it sometimes can be relevant depending on the job. For example, the case notes might be someone is suffering burnout from work-related stress. Then they might need to know.
Or I read one recently, like a person hurt their back at work, so of course that's going to be relevant.
That might be relevant.
Yeah.
But often it's not, so don't include that in your letter because that's using up valuable words in your word count. In addition to that as well, repeating the age as well. In most OET letters, you're going to include the age in the letterhead as well as a reference letter. But often I see the age being repeated again in the first introductory purpose paragraph.
Yeah.
For example, I am writing to refer to you, Mr. Smith, a 66-year-old man. I'm like, well, it's just been mentioned there previously. You don't need to use it again or refer to it again throughout the paragraph. In addition to that as well, often the case notes will have a lot of medication in them, for example, as well. Now, of course, relevant medication is good to include, but do they need to know about every single piece of medication? Does it need to be listed off in a long paragraph? Think about what medication is essential to include and which maybe isn't essential to include as well. Just 3 ideas there to decrease your irrelevant information in your writing section.
Great tips there. It's really good as well to point out some of those things that you do notice in writing letters. Definitely. We notice these a lot. Are you struggling with your OET exam preparation?
Are you unsure how to reach your target score of a grade A or B? Let Swoosh English help you get there.
Go to www.swooshenglish.com or click the link in the description for your free OET complete guide to writing.
Everything you need to know to pass your OET writing step by step. Go to www.swooshenglish.com or click on the link in the description below.
Okay, so is that it with conciseness and clarity?
Yep, irrelevant information, making sure you keep it in as few words as possible.
Yeah, and I can't stress that. That one is something most students need to consider. Like, how many letters do we correct? And they're just well above the word count.
250 words plus.
Yeah, and straight away you're losing so many marks when it comes to the conciseness and clarity.
220 is okay. 20 words or so above, but yesterday I marked a letter was 300 words. I thought, okay, a lot of work to be done here.
Yes.
I'll lose a lot of marks for your conciseness and clarity in your content.
That happens as well when students just, they want to try and they use the case notes too much in order to structure their letter, and then they just want to put like every piece of information
copy and paste
into
the case
the
notes,
letter. Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's what OET actually considers, your ability to organize relevant notes in a logical flow as well.
So we'll get into that more, of course, when we get to that that piece of criteria. Okay, so then genre and style. So what about this one?
So genre and style basically assesses how appropriate your writing is towards the letter that you have written. So example, it's going to be a referral letter. You're not going to be writing in academic prose. You're going to be writing in a short, factual, and clinical style.
Those are the words. Clinical and factual. Always remember those words. That's what it's about. So writing clinical and factual in formal register Of course, still using formal language, not using slang or anything too informal.
But not overtly
but
formal.
not overly formal. So there's a fine line there, isn't there? There's a fine line between it. But yeah, being clinical, precise, and what about technical abbreviations?
Technical abbreviations you have to really consider. So, for example, if you are a doctor writing to another doctor, passing on a referral, then you can assume that the doctor is likely to know a lot of the technical abbreviations you would have studied as a doctor yourself. Therefore, it's within reason, of course, because if you write too many abbreviations, then it might take away from your organizational letter. But it's okay to write that to another doctor. But say you're writing to a care home director, or you're writing to a parent, for example. Is the parent going to know, the director going to know all these abbreviations? No, they're not. So that's inappropriate genre and style.
Exactly.
So take those into consideration.
Yeah, just be careful with them and assess at the end of the day who it is you're writing the letter to. And just consider whether your language is suitable for your target audience. Yeah. That's what it's all about.
So one thing I like to think about as well is the use of connectors for genre and style. Now, of course, you're not writing an essay, as I said, so there are some connectors that you shouldn't be using. The really, really technical ones, such as furthermore, such as moreover, etc., etc. Use words instead like also, in addition, etc. But of course, there's lots of information you can look up in your own time with us at Swoosh English and our blogs about connectors that you can use. But make sure they use the appropriate connectors suitable to the letter.
Yeah, make sure you use the appropriate ones, and also just overuse connectors. You don't need to use a connector at the beginning of every sentence.
Also, and in addition, at the beginning of every sentence, no.
Yeah, when I was working, before I used to mark like IELTS letters as well, and academic essays, and I just noticed a lot of the time, like there would be a connector at the start of every sentence, and I was like, this sounds terrible, even in an academic letter, you know? We don't do that. We don't need to use a connector.
In academic letters, I guess you are supposed to show off your range of English, but you're not really showing off here. In fact, you're trying to be more modest and getting to the point.
Yeah.
It's about a clinical letter.
Yeah.
So in addition to obviously being clinical and showing preciseness, for your genre and style, you're also not supposed to use judgmental language as well.
That's important.
So when it comes to judgmental language, what we mean is you can't make assumptions that will come off maybe as opinionated. And one thing I often see in letters as well is using the word, phrase, for example, heavy drinker or alcoholic, when the case notes might have stated that the person had 1 drink a day. So that's obviously wouldn't be under the definition of being an alcoholic, but if you refer to that person as alcoholic, that will come across as judgmental language. So you have to be as to the point as possible, removing yourself and all opinions from this.
Factual, like
Factual
you said.
Information.
And another thing is Mrs. And I've come, I've had a lot of students question me about this, but if there is no actual reference to the patient being married in the letter, well then don't use Mrs., okay? Just use Miss, because at the end of the day, just use MS. Because if you're using Mrs., I came across a letter before where this person, it was clear that she had postnatal issues and it was postnatal depression, and she did actually, it was clear that she'd had a child, but she wasn't married. So just don't write Mrs., just write MS, be very clear that you're not coming across as judgmental.
Fantastic. So that's good things to consider. Remember, make sure your language is suitable for the target audience and that it is clinical, precise and non-judgmental for your genre and style. Let's move on to the next section, obviously 5 out of 6, organization and layout.
Very good.
So of course, a doctor's letter or a nurse's letter, a medical letter in general, is going to have a precise organization to it, and it's up to you to ensure you know how to lay out the letter, because often the letters are completely in the wrong order. They might start off by talking about family and social history. I'm like, what? Now I have no idea what this letter is about. You haven't included the purpose. So here is a suggestion for the referral letter style of letter that you would get in your OET writing.
And of course, it's a suggestion. There's not like a set.
Some letters may be different depending on the case notes provided, but for most of them it works. Obviously, as we said previously, the first paragraph should be your introduction, which you should set out your purpose. The paragraph after that should include the most recent information, aka if the person's in the hospital, maybe it's today, maybe it was yesterday or the day before. Include the information which has happened during that time, such as how the person was treated, how they were feeling, any medication they were treated. Then the next paragraph or two will go through that clinical information in order from the present to the past. So obviously it could be a week ago the person showed up, and then the next paragraph or within that paragraph could be a month ago the person showed up and this is what happened again. Go through the clinical information, the treatment, how they felt, and the medication. If there's information about their social and medical history, that should then be the next paragraph, because that could be relevant. Make sure, obviously, you don't talk about their marital status and their job if it's not relevant. And then finally, the action at the very end. This is basically restating your purpose as well, about what you want the medical professional you're referring to do in order to treat that person. And then finally, a little sign-off note at the very end, such as, thank you for seeing this patient. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me, etc. So think about that.
Yeah, that's a really good guideline to follow. Excellent.
And of course, we at Swoosh English have lots of guidelines as well for that information. All of our teachers will tell you about organization and layout, because it is something that does take practice if you're not aware how a letter should be structured.
Definitely. And don't bury info in overly long sentences again. That still applies here, using those really long sentences in order to organize and lay out your letter. Just use a variety of sentences and don't let the information get too lost in those long sentences.
You want to keep it nice and short and snappy. Obviously, if a sentence can say the exact same thing in 5 words versus 15, say it in 5 words.
Definitely. And as we said before, avoid a letter that is too heavily based on the structure of the case notes.
Oh, yes.
Make sure that you're able to, lift the information out of the case notes and apply it into the letter in the best organization for its new format.
It is obvious to me when a student has done that, when they've literally just copied the format of the case notes in terms of obviously how they're structured, but also how they're worded. You need to expand the notes. You need to put it into the relevant organization and structure as well.
And as we said, leave out the unnecessary bits, because I've seen letters as well where it's just so obvious that they're just trying to include every piece of information. They haven't actually decided what's necessary,
and that's not going to be a high scoring letter at all.
And we want the logical organization is very important in order to simply make the retrieval of information for the reader most easily accessed.
So put yourself in the reader's shoes. What do they want to know from this case notes and this person's medical history? All right, let's move on to the final section, which is language. The creme de la creme.
Ultimately, this is your English language ability. It's testing your grammatical accuracy, okay? Your grammatical accuracy, so note that that's not your grammatical range necessarily.
And why is that important?
So you're not being tested on, using all these really complex sentences and, making sure you get all these in. It's just about getting what you have written correct, ultimately.
Because after all, unlike an IELTS essay, for example, you're not trying to show off your English, using all these big fancy connectors and terms, and you're using the future perfect continuous. I've never actually seen that used in an essay ever. You're not designed to show off. It's not being designed to show off. You are trying to obviously write it in the most appropriate way. That's why accuracy is more important than range in this letter.
Definitely, accuracy very important. So it's also that language part is also considering, of course, your spelling, your punctuation, your what else do I not say there?
Your grammar as well.
Your
grammatical accuracy. Your spelling, your punctuation, your verb tenses, your use of pronouns.
Modals for politeness. Yeah. So consider whether you use modals for politeness. The correct tense, super important. And perhaps if you use passive voice, these kind of structures.
Good point. Passive voice, if you don't know what it is, I'm sure you do, but make sure you brush up on your passive voice, because passive voice is commonly and often used in a medical style letter. So make sure that you are obviously writing a lot of sentences in the passive voice instead of the active voice.
Yeah, not overusing it, of course, but just getting
you do have to vary it up, but a lot of this style letter is designed to be used a lot in the passive voice.
And just making sure that your letter is free of errors. At the end of the day, if your letter is full of errors in terms of vocab, spelling mistakes, and grammar, it's not going to be very easy for the person to read it.
Yeah, of course.
So ask yourself in terms of your letter, is it going to be easy? How much does it cause strain or stress to another reader to read?
And that is in the criteria as well as someone who's assessing it. Does reading the letter for the assessor cause significant strain? Because if it does, then you can be sure that your language hasn't been that good. You may have misspelled the word, you've used the wrong verb tenses, you haven't used modals appropriately, maybe you haven't used the passive voice, maybe you've used the passive and the active voice incorrectly, etc.
And it's just generally difficult to understand, and they're not going to easily, as we say, all these letters, the foreign medical professional is short on time, they want to be able to read it, assess it, go away from the letter in as fast a time as possible, fully understanding what the patient's needs are and what they have to do.
So some common errors I actually see, for example, is a lack of capitalization. This is so easy to fix as well. Make sure you start every sentence with a capital letter. Often I don't see that. Make sure you've actually ended every sentence with a full stop as well. Often I don't see any punctuation, or I see a comma instead of there being a full stop as well. Also quite commonly as well, I do see gender pronouns being mixed up. Clearly the patient is a woman, but the person refers to them as a he. That's going to cost you some easy marks. So make sure you use the correct gender pronouns as well.
One of the things that I see the most is like punctuation, so commas. So for example, in a compound sentence where they haven't used a comma, or in a complex sentence, that begins with a subordinating coordinator. So yeah, there's a lot of punctuation mistakes, as you said, for sure.
And also conditionals as well. I see quite often when signing off a letter, for example, I will be so pleased if you see this patient. Instead, you should be using the second conditional there. I would be so pleased if you would see this patient. So make sure you look into your conditionals as well. But of course, we offer a lot of that here at Swoosh English.
Great. So yeah, consider, does your letter put a strain on the reader? Assess this whenever you're self-reflecting on your letters as well. And that's the final point. We've come to the end of the criteria. So the final point I want to make is, as you're doing your writing your letters, and a lot of our students get practice getting feedback with writing corrections from a teacher, that is invaluable. So if you don't have access to that, look into it, because you need to know what mistakes you're making at the end of the day. And also make sure you're self-reflecting. Make sure you're not just writing letter after letter after letter, and you're not actually sitting back and thinking to yourself, what mistakes am I making? How can I improve on these and avoid making them again?
It takes time for this information to sink in, because ultimately if you're writing every letter, you're not taking any feedback, then you don't know if you're improving. And I will often see people that do that. If they write letter after letter after letter after letter, they haven't taken on board the mistakes they're making, or they might even make even more mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. So take time, maybe a letter every other day. The next day you can, get back to basics. If you're making like a lot of mistakes with your tenses, get back to basics and practice the present tense, or the present perfect is what I was going to say. Present perfect tense, practice it. Go find grammatical websites where you can do just like practices on these activities.
That's a great way of actually looking at it, I think, as well. One day letter writing, second day receive your feedback, take your feedback in, look into the mistakes you're making, maybe look into any sort of any grammar mistakes you're making, do a lesson on that, see if you can correct it, and then apply it to the next letter you write.
Yes. And ultimately, make sure you're aware of these criteria, as we've tried to make clear to you today. But make sure you get you can get a document on the OET website as well, clearly showing you what you're being marked on. Make sure that you are clear on that and you take it into consideration when you write your letters.
Yeah, OET website has that criteria laid out. Understand it, know it, and apply it to your letters.
Yeah. So that's it for us today then, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you got some really good tips and we were able to break down the criteria for you so you can go away and apply it to your next letter.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again here at Swoosh English. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.